Happy 4th. Happy 250th. Glad to see everybody here. I think, I know we got a couple there that have stepped in, but yeah, most of the people I recognize. He was talking about all these love songs. I remember one of the first albums that I ever bought, because I'm kind of a young guy myself, but it was Captain and Tennille, Love Will Keep Us Together. And I was thinking about that when he was talking about all these love songs today. He missed his opportunity. He could have thrown that one in. I did turn around and tell Ray and his new fiance, what's her name? Sarah, I did tell them. Yeah, there's a good song for them. So today we're going to talk about Hezekiah, King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah is a good king. Good king. They had been talking about good King Uzziah, who was in charge when Isaiah first came along. In fact, it was the first king that Isaiah was a prophet to, but it was only for a very short period, and then Uzziah died. Good King Uzziah died. But you know that King Hezekiah was an even better king. There were other kings in between the two of them that were pretty terrible, to include Hezekiah's father, who was pretty bad. So let's dig into this a little bit. So I thought maybe a little touch of history might be worth something here. Across the top there, Isaiah is the prophet from 742 to 681 BC, just, to kind of like show us what's going on. And Hezekiah is all the red line across there, from 740 to about 687 when Hezekiah died. Isaiah was born in 765. When Hezekiah was born, Isaiah was already 25 years old. Hezekiah became king out here. Let's see. Hezekiah's born. Hezekiah becomes king, I think, around 721 or something like that. In 715 he becomes king. Hezekiah becomes king. So that would make Isaiah would be, 45 years old. So Isaiah's a mature guy when he's talking to King Hezekiah. So when he becomes king, he's 25 years old. So he's got somebody to look up to, a little older guy. And I kind of just got a little timeline stuff there about what Hezekiah did. And, he goes out there and he gets ill. Let's see, he gets ill out there. And in 699 BC, keep in mind, it was in 701 is when the Assyrians come in and threaten Jerusalem. He gets ill about 2 years after that, and then he dies in 687, which is about 15 years later. And we're going to talk about that timeline today. That's what this whole lesson is about. Hezekiah gets ill. So, in verse 1 of chapter 38, this is all from chapter 38 of Isaiah, it starts out, "In those days Hezekiah became ill and was at the point of death. The prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, went to him and said, 'This is what the Lord says.'" Not what me, Isaiah, says, but what the Lord says. He said, "This is what the Lord says. Put your house in order because you're going to die. You will not recover." Wow, great news from the prophet that we all respect and love and everything, and he's up there giving you bad news like that. So why does he do that? And when you go checking out with all the theologians who have analyzed this to death over the years, they say, well, there were practical considerations. When you start finding out you don't have long to go, you need to get your stuff in order, get your wills signed, and for the kingdom of Judah, there's some successor issues. Who's going to take over when he's gone? There are things that Hezekiah probably needs to be thinking about. And there was some spiritual considerations as well. Hezekiah, the good king Hezekiah, he's a good king, and everything has just been falling into place for him all along. But you know what happens, and it even happens to me. Sometimes people start patting you on the back and telling you how good you are, and you know what? You kind of swell up with a little pride and arrogance every once in a while. And every once in a while, God says, maybe it's humble time. I think maybe I got to get Hezekiah back in line. I don't know that that's exactly what happened, but it is a thought that maybe that was part of the issue here. Let's see. So Hezekiah gets the bad news, and all of a sudden he starts thinking about, all the good things he had done. His father had done all kind of bad things, and Hezekiah came in and reversed all that. He started cleaning up the temple. He got the country back on the right religious path, worshiping God. And he just did one good thing after another, and then this happens. He said he hasn't been king all that long. He's 41 years old and he gets this bad news, and he became king at 25 years old. He's only been king about 16 years, and now he gets this bad news and he starts thinking, wow, I'm a young guy and there's a lot I need to be doing, and here I am, my life is getting cut short. So in verse 2, Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and he prayed to the Lord. Remember, Lord, how I have walked before you faithfully and with wholehearted devotion and have done what is good in your eyes. And it just brought tears to his eyes. He said, and he wept bitterly, He'd been a good king for 16 years and he thinks God has let him down by letting him go. Because, now, why would he be worried about that? Well, who's going to come in and succeed you? He had a father who was really bad. He could have a son who's really bad. And you know what? He will have a son who's really bad. It's a good thing that, and maybe God was thinking about that. Boy, if that guy Manasseh were to come in here and take over. He did later on, and we run the country for 50 years and ran it in the country and run it into the ground. But there's good reasons why maybe we need to rethink about Hezekiah leaving this world too early. Let's see what else. Then the word in verse 4, then the word of the Lord came to Isaiah, go and tell Hezekiah, this is what the Lord, the God of your father David says, I have heard your prayer and seen your tears. Yeah, because Hezekiah was really mournful about his situation, and he was praying to God about it, because he knew that's what you do, you pray. And he says, I've heard your prayer, seen your tears, I'll add 15 years to your life, and I will deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria. I will defend this city. There's a couple of issues here. One is that perhaps, God is, I got thinking, does God really change his mind? He said you're going to die, and now he says you're not going to die. Does God change his mind? We're usually not taught that God goes around changing his mind too much. But God, in this case, there's some lessons to be learned from this. And one was that God wanted to show that there is power in intercession. In other words, you pray for something, every once in a while, your prayer should be heard and something should be done about it. And that's what happened here. God decided, I'm going to extend his life 15 more years. That was a good thing. One other thing here is what he said there at the end, in the yellow highlighting there, and I will deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Syria. I will defend this city. God knows who better to defend this city than King Hezekiah. And what would happen to it if Hezekiah wasn't around? So those are just some considerations about what may be going on here and why God decided to give him another 15 years. Let's see. What was King Hezekiah's illness? It says he's going to die. Has he got cancer? Has he got a heart disease? He's going to have a heart attack? What is it? Well, if you skip all the way over to the end of the chapter, verse 21, there's a little thing there that says, Isaiah had said, prepare a poultice of figs and apply it to the boil, and he will recover. A boil. You think about a boil. Anybody ever had a boil in your life? I'm from Georgia. We used to have them all the time. Used to call them risins, in fact, there's things like that. Boils, and you know what? They're terrible. Where do you get them? You usually get them under your belt or on your elbow or someplace where you're always touching something. And they're terrible. You think you're going to die. You really do think you're going to die. They can be very terrible, but I'm surprised that so few of you have had them. Well, that's okay. That must be the California. It's the good weather here. Maybe it's the lack of humidity you don't get them. In Georgia, you get them all the time. People had them all the time. And they're not pretty. They're not pretty. Usually you can wear a long sleeve shirt and maybe hide it or something, because what they are is, well, I got it here. Boils, are they dangerous? Boils are pus-filled lumps under the skin caused by infected hair follicles. Here's a picture I pulled up of Hezekiah off of, where that picture come from? It came off Google, but Google probably took it off of a coin or something from back in those days. Not the exact picture, but something that gave you the idea. All of those kings had loads of hair, gobs of hair. Do you think they got hair follicles? Do you think there's a possibility that they could have an infected hair follicle? So the issue is one thing to have a boil or something, but when do they become dangerous? The boil is on when to see a doctor. If you go Google it now, it says, what do you do if you got a boil? It tells you, hey, wait. It says wait. A couple of weeks, maybe it'll go away. They'll get pus filled and all that stuff. They will eventually drain a little bit, but they said if it's on your face, it's trouble. Because it's too close to your brain and all that stuff, and the infection can spread and you could die. So you need to go to see a doctor. They tell you don't lance it or do anything like that because you probably will spread the infection more than you'll solve it. But I can remember back in the old days in Georgia, they had all these homemade cures. Like, you ever heard the one about the Coke bottle and stuff, where you take a Coke bottle and kind of like evacuate it and you put a vacuum and you put it over the thing and it would suck the pus out of the risings and all that stuff. Well, the doctors tell you now, don't do that. Don't do that. But I can tell you that all those people with homemade cures, that was it. How do you make a Coke bottle suck something out? Well, what they would do is they'd say, you take a little piece of paper and you light it. Then you put the Coke bottle up against it, and when the flame burns down, it burns up the oxygen, creates a vacuum, and then it pulls the stuff out. And for you physics-minded people, I thought, well, a little less than that. Never heard anybody. Okay, a healthcare provider may need to numb the area, make a small incision. So a doctor would do it. And if you get more than one boil, like you get a bunch of them on you, they call them carbuncle. That's the term carbuncle. You may have heard that term. You California people might have heard carbuncle side. All right, so what I did, I thought, how dangerous would it be to have boils, especially multiple ones? So what I did is I asked AI, what would Hezekiah look like if he had multiple boils on his face? And guess what? AI drew me a picture. I thought, so this is not real, but it does show you what would happen if you had multiple boils on your face. And you can see it ain't pretty. It isn't pretty either. All right. Okay. For whatever that's worth. But if it's a boil, and that's what Isaiah is saying we're going to treat with the fig poultice, when you go to verse 21, they can be life-threatening if they're on your face or your upper body. And I guess they could be life-threatening in other places too, but they usually just tell you, gut it out and wait. Let them drain on their own. And for those of you who are really into this thing and want to know more about it, the home remedies, here you go. So, the old home remedies were, just, soak a warm cloth, but don't pick them, squeeze them, boil them, or lance them, do any of that stuff. Wash the area. And back in verse 21, there at the end, yellow writing at the bottom, Isaiah had said, prepare a poultice of figs and apply it to the boil, and he will recover. And the only reason I put that stuff about the compresses in there is it kind of sounds like that would be the cure that you would be given today, and maybe a poultice of figs is something kind of like that, a little compress. Hezekiah is looking for Hezekiah has been told, I'm going to give you 15 more years. God's going to give him 15 more years. Hezekiah, you'd say, here's what John Holland would do. I'd say, thank you, God. Thank you very much. What does Hezekiah do? He says, I need some evidence that you're going to give me 15 more years. What will be the sign that I will go up to the temple of the Lord? What is the temple of the Lord? I initially thought it was heaven, but it's not here. Here, they're used to going to the temple, every week, going to the temple. And he just wants God to show him that he's still going to be able to go to the temple. That's what he means, go up to the temple of the Lord. And he said, what's the sign that I'm really going to be able to do it? And so that turns into this little group of things. Here's this, and here's the next, verse 7. This is the Lord's sign to you, that the Lord will do what he has promised. I will make the shadow cast by the sun go back the 10 steps it has gone down on the stairway of Ahaz. Ahaz was Hezekiah's father, by the way. So the sunlight went back the 10 steps it had gone down. So y'all are now going to look at me like, now give us the physics explanation about how God did this. And you know what? I'm not going to do that. Because I think here's the real test for us. Every once in a while, you just have to accept what God's going to do on faith. God said he's going to do it, he's going to do it. You know, God did a lot of interesting things along the way. If you go back and read Genesis, he did a lot of things by merely speaking them. He spoke things into existence. And you know what? Every time he did it, it was good. Remember that? Go back and read Genesis if you forgot that. All right. The Creator, he spoke things into existence in Genesis. Again, applies his divine power. And you could look at it that way. God's just going to, he's going to make, he knows Hezekiah needs some assurance. And he's going to give him the assurance. And he said he's going to do it. He's going to do it. And you could accept that as just a divine action that God is going to take. Have faith and don't worry about it. Or you could be a physics guy and worry yourself to death over how did this really happen? Or did it happen? And, you know, I said, has God ever done this before? And if you really want to know about God doing things like making the sun stand still or anything, if you go back and read Joshua 10, you can actually see an incident where Joshua asked God, after he had done some miraculous fighting for God and saved the town of Gibeon, that he did ask God to have the sun stand still. And if you want to read that, go back and read Joshua 10. I'm not going to, it takes too long to go, I'm not going to do that today. How does God do this? Okay. So again, I've still got the same words, you know, verse 7 up there. This is the Lord's sign to you that the Lord will do what he's promised. I'll make the shadow cast by the sun go back the 10 steps, etc. And another option for what he was doing was that God divinely bends light to move the shadow without affecting planet movements. You know, Einstein did a lot of stuff when he was doing his theories about light bending in the universe. And I thought, is it possible that this is what God would have used as his tool? You know, he uses tools, even uses the Assyrians as tools occasionally, but maybe he's using some physics here to make the shadow go backwards. But you know what? Even though it's an interesting idea, I think the best idea is just God said he's going to do it, and he did it. Have faith, it'll happen. Let's see. And then there are people that think, is it possible that this is some symbolic move, like Hezekiah returning to an earlier healthy state? I mean, if you can make the shadows go back, could you make Hezekiah's health state go backwards too? You know, and again, these are the guys that go to seminary that fight, that come up with these guys things here. You know, there's nothing worse than talking to those guys sometimes, because they have all kind of great ideas about what could be, what maybe we ought to consider. Theologically, this miracle reassures believers of God's ability to intervene in human affairs and his willingness to provide signs to strengthen faith. Okay, enough of that stuff. The next verse, verse 9, a writing of Hezekiah, king of Judah, after his illness and recovery. Oh, so he starts writing about what has happened to him. He has recovered. Now he is writing some stuff. He says, and he's kind of doing a little history, what we would in the grief class call journaling. You know, you journaling, go and write down what all happened to you and all that stuff. And it makes you feel better sometimes to actually put it down in print. What has happened to you? And so that's kind of what Hezekiah is doing here in verse 10. I said, in the prime of my life, must I go through the gates of death and be robbed of the rest of my years? He's saying this at 41 years old. Remember, I told you that's when he got ill. He said, I will not again see the Lord himself in the land of the living. And, I kind of thought I got that when I read it. Yeah, he's not going to see the Lord here. You'll see him when he gets to heaven. But there was another issue. Back in those days, the temple was called the land of the living. So he says, I will not again see the Lord himself in the land of the living. Man, he wasn't going to see him in the temple. But that is if he died. But maybe he'll live, and he will get to see him in the temple. He says, no longer will I look on my fellow man or be with those who now dwell in the world. Let's see. Like a shepherd's tent, my house has been pulled down and taken from me. Wow. Yep, Hezekiah, you're pretty big. You're a big wheel in town. You're the king and everything. And now he is. He's losing it. He's losing the things that he owned. I mean, because if God takes his life, he's lost it all. He's gone from being the king to being somebody's probably going to have one of those caregivers there with him. His life will completely change. And it says, like a weaver, I have rolled up my life, and he has cut me off the loom. Any weavers in here? Any of you gals? Weavers? You had the loom there, you finish your project, you go cut it off at the bottom, you roll it up. My first wife was a weaver, so I kind of got a little taste of that. But when it's over, it's over. You roll that thing up. Completed my little project. Head down to the flea market and sell it to somebody. I don't know. But the point I think here is that death is the great equalizer here. Hezekiah has gone from being the king to being like one of us. I mean, he's just a guy who struggles with death. Death happens to lots of folks. Can y'all hear me okay? Yeah? You say you wish I'd turn it down. It's okay. King Hezekiah realized, okay, in verse 13, I waited patiently till dawn, but like a lion, he broke all my bones day and night. You made an end of me. I cried like a swift or thrush. I moaned like a mourning dove. My eyes grew weak. Keep in mind, this is all part of his journaling. He's writing about what he went through while he was ill. And but what he realized here is that God has brought him down to his knees. He was completely at God's mercy when all this happened, and there was nothing he could do about it. He may be the king, but he has no power over his life, and that he's just going to have to wait for God to act. All right, good King Hezekiah. Okay, now verse 15. But what can I say? He has spoken to me, and he himself has done this. I will walk humbly all my years because of this anguish of my soul. Lord, by such things people live, and my spirit finds life in them too. You restored me to health and let me live. In other words, this has been an experience, and I learned something from it. I, King Hezekiah, will probably be a better person having gone through this, even though I don't hope I never get a boil on me again. But he realizes that there was an experience. We all kind of justify when bad things happen. Bad things happen to good people, and we try and say, well, God has a plan, and it's a test maybe that he's given us. And maybe this is just it is a test for Hezekiah to go through this. But it doesn't mean that we have to enjoy it when God tests us. But in verse 17, surely it was for my benefit that I suffered such anguish. In your love you kept me from the pit of destruction. You have put all my sins behind your back. Okay, so God brought him through it. And Hezekiah walks away from this incident feeling like he understands why God did this. Why God put him through these trials, that it actually will make him a better king when it's all done. Now, in verse 18, for the grave cannot praise you, death cannot sing your praise. And you know, that was one of Isaiah's concerns back when he first started talking about his situation, is that, hey, I can worship you, God, while I'm living, but if I go, I can't worship you anymore. It'd be nice if I could hang around here for a while. So what he's summarizing here in verse 18, you know, if he's gone, he can't praise God, but he can now sing God's praise. For those who go down to the pit cannot hope for your faithfulness. The living, they praise you, as I am doing today. Parents tell their children about your faithfulness. You know, he's saying that like in the third person, but he could have been saying it talking to them. Parents, tell your children about your faithfulness. I kind of think there's a lesson for us there too. Tell your children, you know, so that they know what people go through, and that there is and that God will come around and fix things sometimes in a favorable way. So in verse 20, the Lord will save me, and we will sing with stringed instruments all the days of our lives in the temple of the Lord. So apparently, from my little research, as simple as it is, kind of indicated that they didn't use instruments too much in the temple. You know, David liked playing the lyre and doing things, but in the temple, people didn't use the instruments. But now Hezekiah is saying, we are going to use instruments. We are going to introduce organists and pianos and all those other things into the worship services here. We're going to do that, and we're going to sing about this. And we're not going to just do it next Sunday because I just got healed. We're going to do it forever, all the days of our lives. You could translate this forever. So that's the way it's going to be from now on. I thought about a little song that we could sing, and in the 1700s, some guy wrote this song called King Hezekiah Lay Deceased. That we're not going to sing that one here. That's not going to be our group song. But I thought it was kind of neat, and what I liked about the song is, like a lot of old poems, the words rhyme. I love it when poems rhyme. You know, we have poet laureates that have never made anything rhyme in their life, and yet they become the poet laureate of America. Sometimes that's always disturbed me, because that means you got to understand, what are they talking about? I prefer reading the things that rhyme. King Hezekiah lay diseased, with every dangerous symptom seized, beyond the cure of art, with languid pulse and strength decayed, with spirit sunk and soul dismayed, and ready to depart. And y'all can read the rest of it on your own. All you got to do is go Google King Hezekiah lay deceased, and you can get the words, and you can read it, and take a week or so to do that. And you can come back and we'll talk about it next week. Anyhow, tough song, but he actually did lay out the whole book of Isaiah 38 there in that thing, and that was written in the mid-1700s. When people tried to do that, there are also plays that have been written about King Hezekiah dying. There are children's plays about this, and if you go out and look at some Google YouTube videos on that kind of thing. Well, happy day. We're getting near the end here. Chapter 39. Next week, what are we going to do in chapter 39? King Hezekiah. Oh, the people from Babylon hear about King Hezekiah getting better, and they come to talk to him and congratulate him on recovery and all that stuff. And Hezekiah does some foolish things in the process of showing those guys around. He showed them, you know, every once in a while we get so proud of something that we do that we show off a little bit, and maybe we show off a little too much. And that's what chapter 39 is about. We'll talk about it next week. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans,